Hello everyone, hope you're having a beautiful day. It is Ryan and Matt here again for a short Facebook Live. Today we are going to talk about the autonomic nervous system, some real basics so you can understand it in relation to trauma, but also our human experience, because we all have an autonomic nervous system, and it's really important to understand how it works and the basics of the different branches of that nervous system and the states that we can go into. I'm sure you've all heard of the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this short video. We'll try and keep it to under 10 minutes, which we're doing with these videos lately. So Matt, do you want to talk about those nervous system responses there? And I'll bring up a diagram while you're doing that.
Yeah, so like all animals have them in a sense. So it's kind of like if we use the metaphor of a rat and a cat. Say the rat's just like crawling through the garden, and the cat sort of sees something scurry in the bushes and comes a bit closer, and the rat then sees the cat or senses that it's there, and it instantly gets it stops dead in its tracks. It's like a freeze. And so that's what we will call the freeze response. And say the rat comes closer, the cat comes closer. I always jumble up the words rat and cat while I'm telling this because they're so similar. The cat comes closer, and the rat might then go into a flight response. Run, scurry off, and it might just bolt for dear life. Or if it's a decent sized rat and it's got enough courage, it
Likes
might go
its chances.
likes its chances, or it is cornered, it feels cornered and it can't fly. It might go into a fight response and get aggressive. So that can be like emotions of rage and anger and stuff like that. The flight response will have more emotions of fear and terror, like terror, like I'm going to be annihilated. So, run. So it's a different energetic quality. And say then the cat lunges and gets the rat in its mouth. And the rat goes into another freeze response. It becomes frozen, but then it realizes, well, there's nothing I can do, and it goes limp. It's like plays possum. It'll play dead. It's like our cats, sometimes they catch mice, and when it's in their mouth, it's not moving. It's playing dead, in a sense, and that's would be the fawn response. So the muscles go limp, and it's another survival response. So we've got fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So that's just a metaphor of how all these different survival responses can play out, and they're wired in our nervous system. They're actually highly intelligent, the way that it's set up. They're for specific situations where our lives feel threatened. But it's interesting because human beings, it's not just our lives, our bodies. Our bodies are rarely threatened, to the point that we believe we're going to die physically, but our identities get threatened continuously. Holding my position or someone challenging my belief system can feel like a threat, like I'm going to die if I lose this position. And so those same fight, flight, freeze responses can play out on a real psychological level, which then, like to our psychological self, which then affects the body in the same way as if I'm being eaten by a tiger. So, example we use a lot is I put my hand up in class and everyone laughs at me and I keel over. I feel this big. And that can be a fawn response, or I freeze. Something into, you idiot, why'd you ask that question? So I'm frozen in that moment. And so we get these spikes of stress that happen, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, or below homeostasis, which is freeze, or which is a fawn, or a more shutdown dorsal vagal response. And when that spike or drop never completes itself, and we never get that I'm safe now, where the whole nervous system, it's like the exhale comes back to a ground, like it's over. When that doesn't happen, that's what trauma is from a nervous system perspective. Our nervous system gets stuck halfway in one of these states. And so Ryan's going to bring up a diagram just to tell the basics of the nervous system and how it works. neurons.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Matt. I've had the diagram up now for people to have a look at, and I'll sort of talk about those different branches. We've just had a question in the comments saying, is Fawn the same as collapse or shutdown, like tonic and mobility? Yes, it is. So I'll explain that now as we go through the different branches, because the dorsal vagal or shutdown response is a spectrum which both freeze and fawn come from. So if we look up the top here, this is kind of the most basic way to explain the branches of the autonomic nervous system. So if we start with the sympathetic nervous system on the right hand side there, so when Matt was talking about fight or flight, then this is where we see this nervous system state. So this is an activation or a mobilization of the nervous system. We are prepared to act or move in some way, whether that's I'm going to run, or whether that's I'm going to fight back or start an argument, or whatever it is. That's the fight or flight response. It's important as we're talking about this and going through this that you maybe start to think about your own life and where these nervous system states show up for you, in what scenarios, around whom, where have they shown up in the past, because awareness is the first step to change. So sympathetic nervous system, it's one that we tend to be more familiar with. It is activated, mobilized, I'm ready for action. A lot of our blood flow is moving to the limbs because we want to take whatever action is necessary. If we move over to the parasympathetic nervous system on the left-hand side there are various branches to that. So polyvagal theory tells us that there are different branches of that PNS, whereas classically we thought of the parasympathetic nervous system as just the rest or digest, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. So if we look at the rest and digest, that is part of the parasympathetic. So this is a shutdown response, but it has the key component that it has an absence of fear. When there's an absence of fear and our body goes into a relaxed state, we're able to assimilate food, we're able to make repairs to the body internally, the things that we need to. This is why chronic stress can be so much of a problem, because if we're in a chronic stress state, then we're not giving our body the chance to be able to repair itself and assimilate food properly, and we can run into all sorts of health issues that way. We move over then to the dorsal vagal high tone. This is the freeze or immobilization response. So when it comes down to freeze or fawn, it's this branch of the autonomic nervous system. So this is where we have fear present, but we are in an immobilized state. So as opposed to immobilized in sympathetic, we are immobilized, but we still have fear present, like we do in a sympathetic response as well. Now we have to look at this as a spectrum. So if we look at the shutdown response as a spectrum, the extreme end of that spectrum is feigning death. This is what reptiles, this is the reptilian part of our brain that we're dealing with. So what reptiles will do, they will, in situations where they feel like their life is under threat, they will feign death. Heart rate will lower massively, their body will go completely limp. This is the extreme of a shutdown or immobilization. That works quite well for reptiles. It's a little bit harder for us mammals, and we'll only use it in extreme circumstances. That's because as mammals, and especially as human beings, we have a much higher demand for oxygen. So it's harder to actually go into a feigning death response unless we absolutely must, and our nervous system says, okay, this is what we're doing. But then as we come, let's say that's the extreme end of the spectrum. If you look at the other end of the spectrum, so maybe a more mild manifestation, then we're talking about, mild dissociation. With dissociation, such a topic at the minute, there's dissociative affective avoidance disorder, all of that, those kind of labels, which are just a chronic state of this shutdown response. So dissociating is a way that we can shut down and dissociate from our direct experience. People pleasing is a massive fawn response, where we'll just do everything to make sure everybody else is okay. That is a form of shutdown as well. So once again, think about where this maybe shows up in your life. Where am I going into mild or extreme dissociation? Where am I people pleasing? Because this is all a shutdown response based on that fear mechanism. And the final branch I'll talk about is the ventral vagus. This is the newest part of the autonomic nervous system that isn't present in reptiles and other animals like that. But as we start to move into mammals and especially human beings, this is a very prominent part of the nervous system. The ventral vagus is about engagement, social connection, feeling safe. Okay, being able to foster a ventral vagal connection, especially early in life, helps us deal with life's challenges so much easier, because the thing is, life is always going to put us in sympathetic nervous system or in dorsal vagal shutdown responses based on the stimulus that comes in. Where our ability to move through these things come, how quickly can I come back into a safe state? How can I feel safe within my body again and let that nervous system fear state complete itself? And that is made so much easier by a really healthy connection with our caregivers when we're younger. However, we can give that back to ourselves as adults and learn to foster more of a ventral vagal connection. But it equals safety, which is the completion of a fear response. So I hope all that makes sense and wasn't too in depth. That's kind of as simply as you can break down the autonomic nervous system. So I hope that answers any questions you might have had about that. If you have any questions and are watching the replay, pop them in the comments and we'll be more happy to answer them. And also if you're enjoying these lives and there's something you want us to talk about on the next one, just let us know a topic and myself and Matt will talk about that. Someone just commented emotional resilience. So yeah, that's resilience is being able to come back into a safe space after being heightened with certain emotions. Now, you might label someone as saying, oh, they're not emotionally resilient because they are reactive all the time and can't bring themselves down from a heightened state. But that's how this nervous system here that we're explaining has adapted. So there's a real readaptation that needs to happen in order for us to really build that emotional resilience and come back to safe and calm. Matt, thank you as always.
Thanks, Ryan.
Bye-bye.